Well, welcome once again to our Inspiration Bite Size, when we look to unpack what is the kingdom of God, what are we supposed to be doing as Christians in our communities, in the business world, in areas of education, uh, commerce, it could be media, anything. Where Jesus told us to go out and to get involved and to be the light in our communities. So we are interviewing people just to see how they're involved, and we've got quite an interesting lineup of people to speak to. But today we have David Barker with us. I've known David for, I don't know actually how long I've known, 5 or 6 years. Very, very interesting man. A lot to unpack, and with Inspiration Bite Size, we say we do it in a very short time because it is bite size. But David's been involved in so many things. We'll try and get through it very quickly, but then we'll see how it goes. So, David, welcome to Inspiration Bite Size. What I'm going to start off with, can you just tell us something about who you are, your family life, or?
Sure, yes. So I am a social entrepreneur. So I've been a social entrepreneur now for 16 years. So looking at social issues, looking at how we're trying to tackle them, can we come up with some new ideas, new solutions to tackle problems in society, then get some funding to prototype, pilot, and if successful, scale them up. So we're doing that for about 16 years. I'm married. I live in Leighton Buzzard, Bedfordshire, with my wife Sophia. Sophia is a secondary school teacher. And family life, we've not yet had children. We were planning to start this year, but when COVID hit, we decided to put that back a year. So yeah, but hopefully in the near future, we'll be starting to have children as well, which I'm very excited about.
That's good to hear. Actually, the last time I saw you, I think it was 2016. It was when you just got married. I think you got married in August of that year. So glad to hear that's still going well. That's great news. Yeah. Tell us a bit about your Christian journey.
Yeah, so I've been agnostic for a lot of my life, and I was working in a homeless soup kitchen volunteering December 2005. I just got chatting to one of the volunteers, and we shared about the last year in our life. And when I shared mine, he was like, "Whoa, God's right at the heart of what you're doing. You're so, I said, "No, I'm not a Christian. I'm just doing this." He said, "No, seriously, you got to trust me. This is God." So he gave me an invitation. That invitation was to come, with him on an Alpha course, which I did. The first 5 weeks, I was very resistant. There is no God, and it's just me and random luck. But then I realized, actually, when you really look at the story, the points of my life, you could tell this is painting by numbers, and it only reveals God at the heart of what I was doing in my whole life, not just in that last 12 months. So yeah, I came to faith Easter Sunday 2006, and that renewed sense of purpose, that reboot has really helped guide me ever since.
Great. Okay. Really good news. It gives us a foundation of what I suppose when we start to unpack your journey, where you've come from, what you've achieved, and certainly what you're doing now. Obviously, Christianity's got a large part to play with that. But can you just tell us a little bit about your early life, your childhood?
Yeah, originally from Manchester, North Manchester, quite a poor community. We were officially in the classification of in poverty. My father struggled. He had a good job, but then got made redundant, couldn't find work. So he hired a market stall and started selling fruit and veg, and then he got a small van and delivered that to the community. And he ended his career as a window cleaner. So for me, yes, we struggled, but we still had a happy life. My dad was amazing, and actually, I think his model to me is an entrepreneur. He saw problems and he dealt with them and got on with it and found solutions and helped us get through that. So, I'm now a serial entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, but I think observing how my dad was actually, for me, was the first lesson of entrepreneurship. Make sure you survive and make sure you're still standing to tell the tale. And that's really helped me to be probably a resilient entrepreneur in my career. But yeah, I struggle to get going. And actually, I was unemployed at 16. I'd made that decision at school not to go to university. It's a good choice, but I felt I wanted to leave school at 16 and start work. Interestingly, my careers teacher said, "You can't get into technology now, which is your dream because you're not going to university, and give up now. And but I said, no, I want to try. So I left school unemployed. Don't know if you remember the youth training scheme of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government in the 80s to tackle youth unemployment. I was
£25 a week.
£25 a week. But that paid my bus fares. I was very excited. Thank you very much. And I got an apprenticeship in an education technology company. That's all I needed. Showed what I could do. They hired me after that apprenticeship in only 3 months, became a full-time employee. 7 years later, I was one of the UK's first internet entrepreneurs in the early 90s and drove a successful internet company then. But if I'd listened to that teacher at 15 years old, you can't do that without a degree, I'd have lived a very different life. So yeah, I managed to break free from the struggle and get on that path to a successful internet entrepreneur. But yeah, that's a bit, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, because I'll pick up a bit on that, because basically you came from probably a very poor community, not a lot of money in the family. You just said you did the youth opportunities, so in many ways things were stacked against you from day one. But just I've got some information about you now, which I took from the Guardian actually. So in 2004, it said that you achieved most of your goals. You were I wouldn't say the amount you were earning, but it's an impressive 6-figure sum. You had a 25% stake in a successful internet company. You had fast cars, big houses. You had all the trappings of success. And in many ways you can think, well, this is great, I'll just continue with this. But you didn't. You suddenly realized there was some greater needs in the community. I'm obviously still an entrepreneur, you're still very successful, but then instead of just making money for yourself, you started to turn things around. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I know you did a lot of research by going to different countries. You went to sort of, I got listed here, East Berlin, Moscow, Beijing, Palestine, Uganda, the US and the UK, looking at different types of businesses. And can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in '94, I basically ended up one of the first digital marketing agencies in the UK. And over the next 10 years, I was working for Intel, working for Microsoft, working for Cisco. We were futurists. We were looking at the future of how the world needs to use technology, and we were driving the campaigns to persuade people to stop using the old ways of the yellow pages and to adopt technology like we're adopting now with COVID accelerated. We were driving that way of thinking from the early 90s. So did that for 10 years, and you ride that wave, you become successful, you make lots of money. However, it got to 2004 and I was traveling the world working with these global corporations. But at the heart of it, I did believe that the internet is a way that we can all prosper, we can be connected around the world, everybody can have opportunity and prosperity. But actually, as I traveled the world since 2000, it was very much unemployment's getting worse, homelessness is getting worse, politics is destabilizing. And yeah, I got to 2004 and I felt, actually, I don't want to drive this business anymore. I don't want to drive the internet anymore. I want to focus on these issues that are serious issues. I came from a poor background. Actually, the success story is the story I tell. Well, yeah, despite of that, I became very successful. But the real story is my friends from school who also left at 16. They believed the lie of you couldn't achieve because you're not going to university. They did things they hated. They became underemployed or unemployed. And quite a few of them fell into crime. I know one was in prison for murder, one committed suicide. At 16, we were just the same, on the same starting line of leaving school. I broke free, but most don't. And so really, it's that realization of we're living in an unjust world. It doesn't have to be that way if we can intentionally make it better. And so for me, resigning from my business and with a mission of can we tackle unemployment and poverty around the world with no plan. It wasn't a here's the business plan. It was, I'm a true believer. Well, work out your mission first, and the plan will come. So I thought I want to tackle unemployment, poverty, a global issue. I can't do that full time working for my business. So I resigned, and I set myself free to take a step forward in that direction. So that, a realization of a lot needs to be done with the problems of the world. Do I have can I use entrepreneurial skills to get involved, and that began my step into the issues of unemployment and poverty in different countries. The reason for the different countries was, if we think about global poverty, it all boils down to the ability to generate an income. Whether you're self-employed, you've got a business, you're employing people. So we think that the capitalist system is just a system for the flow of money. The problem at the moment is not enough is drinking from the well of the capitalist system. So can I come into that with going into communities of Israel, Palestine, Germany, China, Russia, understanding how people earn money on the ground up, and then meet people in the government and business and say, well, how are we creating jobs? What's the policy? And just pick that up from different countries. So that when I came back to the UK, I could try to think of ideas that we can prototype. Yes, that will be in the UK because that's where I am. But if successful, could we scale it into Germany, Africa, different countries? You can't if you didn't think about it from the beginning. So that early research was really understand the global system, innovate locally, but then see if we can then scale something that can benefit people in many different countries around the world. So that very much that first year of my journey was just immersion into the crisis of what's really causing some of the issues in the world. That was 2005.
That's great. My next question you've actually answered really. I was going to ask you what is a social entrepreneur, but I think you just answered that with that one. That's explaining that you are a business entrepreneur, but what you're actually doing is putting so much of what you're making and so much of what you're learning back into local communities and national communities. In fact, international communities, because I've recently heard of you being interviewed overseas. So, as a Christian, how do you think your faith has helped you develop over the years?
Yeah, well, when I made that step to leave the business and tackle unemployment and poverty, I was still agnostic. So I wasn't driven by, I know this is God, and it was very much just from the heart. That is it can be a good thing in itself. It's truly from the heart. And then as I went around the world, and so this journey was happening, but then I'd hit dead ends, and at one point I should have died, but I didn't. I was steered in a different direction by a stranger. So these are the events of that year that at the time it was, well, that was lucky, no, that was lucky. But then by the end of the year, ended up in that soup kitchen in Hammersmith with a soup kitchen run by the local church, speaking to a volunteer who I told the story to. He led me to faith March 2006. That was great. But since then, my faith is the strongest when I'm really in desperate situations. So fast forward from 2006 to 2008, I couldn't afford to eat. I used soup kitchens myself, so I had no money. Basically, in the corporate sector, somebody in that recession, remember that recession year, the Great Recession of 2008, a business owed me £75,000. They decided not to pay it because of the recession. They needed to keep the money for themselves, even though they owed me the 75,000, which I owed. So interestingly, we talk about ethics in business. Well, pay the bills, and that wouldn't put me into a poverty situation, but it did. I took that as a case study of bad business behaviour that I can campaign for, but then I had to survive it myself. Yeah, I was eating in soup kitchens for food. But I was never sad. I was never regretful. And people said, who knew me in that year, said, "You were always at church on a Sunday, praising God." And but you've told us a story where you're living in poverty for a year, eating in soup kitchens. I said, "Yeah, but I knew I was on that journey with God, and I was there for a reason." And that case study actually is a really important case study. What causes poverty? Businesses not paying their bills. So this journey sometimes can look bizarre, but my faith is the strongest actually when things are going wrong, and actually I always say, the eye of the storm is the calmest place. So even though you're in the eye of the storm, actually that gives you a chance to really, really see God and what God's doing. Obviously, you've got to work your way out of the crisis, but yeah, I've always felt my faith is strongest in a crisis, not when I think they're great and going well.
That's great. Yeah, because it leads me on to actually, because with most larger companies, they would have some kind of social responsibility statement, what their social responsibility actually is, whether that's just something they really believe in or it's just something that they've got to do. Do you think you could be a business and be successful, very profitable, and still be socially responsible?
Yeah, I think we just need to agree what we mean by socially responsible. So I think the good news is we don't all have to go out there trying to innovate products that tackles youth unemployment, which is that's especially a space that I'm involved in at the moment. But just running a business where you pay your suppliers on time in 30 days, not in 120 days. You can make a little bit more interest on the money sat in the bank, because the impact on the supply chain is huge, especially for small businesses. So I think all we mean by socially responsible is things like pay your suppliers in 30 days, pay them well. I mean, I had a contractor come to me on a project, and what he was going to charge me, I looked at and said to him, I'm not paying you that. He said, well, what do you want me to go down to? I said, no, I want you to raise your price. Because, so he'd gone through this experience of so many companies pushing him down, that his amazing work wasn't being valued. He was just a commodity for a product. So we've got to change that mindset. We're not paying that. We need to raise those prices, because this guy had a kid. How can he survive on what he was earning in the market? So I think I think those who are at the front of the supply chain where the money comes in have to take responsibility for the health of the whole supply chain, not have the power to take the profit at the front and everyone gets squeezed down to the producer at the bottom. We need a way of sharing that across the supply chain. Yes, you're fortunate you're at the front, but we've got to have that prosperity carried across the supply chain. Can we treat suppliers like we treat our employees and protect them just as strongly? So that for me is responsible business as much as the products and services themselves.
Okay, we're getting near to the end of our time. I wish we had so much longer, because this is really quite an interesting subject. But where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, 10 years' time?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think as social entrepreneurs, we can innovate, we can all create responsible businesses. But I truly believe now the final piece of this jigsaw for a prosperous world is politics. So for me personally, I've stood for elections as a councillor, not elected yet. I stood as an MP for the practice. I knew I wasn't going to be elected, but I stood to get the experience. So I'd like to take that step to being a councillor, potentially an MP. But actually, I think there's a role for United Nations. So I think I'd love to be engaging with the United Nations. How could I potentially use the skill set and experience I have to feed into UN policy? There's been talk about having a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. I actually think that's a great idea. Could I potentially be involved in that? So I think there'll be a move into politics. I think it's important, politics. I think we need more people to say, we need more people like us getting elected. It's not just a career path, it's people passionate about their communities truly and can move into those positions. So I think that's where in 5-10 years I'd like to take a more of an active role as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned United Nations, because I was just thinking that's probably the last time I saw you was actually at the United Nations.
Geneva.
Yeah, so there you go. That's really good. We wish you all the best in that one. So we got to the end of our time now. So finally, I'm going to ask you a question I'm asking everybody. Do you have a favourite hymn or worship song?
Well, I know the song I kept playing to myself in 2008 when I was in that poverty year going to Soup Kitchen. When you've got songs like Oceans and Going Deeper. So songs like that, it's basically those hymns that prophetically speak to you, whether it's Oceans and other hymns. But really, it's a call to do something, and actually quite often a few of us are going through it already. Just songs like that, hymns like that are what I really like to play in the dark time. You called me out to go deeper. I'm here, Lord, and I pray you'll be with me as we rise out.
That's great. So thank you, David. That comes to the end of our time. So we've been talking to David Barker. And I would mention, actually, I have followed your elections, actually, and it's interesting because I think you've always stood as an independent. So you've been up against it from day one without any party support, but obviously you've got your own support. And we wish you all the best, whether you end up at the United Nations or a member of Parliament or wherever you end up. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Mike.